Hey y'all, thank you for joining me on another video. Um, this week's topic is pretty loaded. It's a continuation of what I said I was going to do, and that's um, a series on narcissistic relationships because that's what I was in. And I'm discovering that narcissism is not very rare. I was able to pull up all kinds of posts and information on narcissism just by using the word narcissism or narcissistic relationship. Um, it's pretty common, but it's also heinous because it's a silent type of abuse. Because usually, because a lot of narcissists are not necessarily physically abusive. In fact, I'd say from what I could see as of now, it's 50-50. And the ones that don't use physical abuse, it's by design. Because they know that with physical abuse, there's proof. Whereas emotional abuse, there's not necessarily proof. And today, I want to talk about how when how a person can fall for a narcissist. In my case, and I'm finding in majority of the cases of narcissists, they will literally tell you whatever you want to hear. I mean, literally. They will act the way that you want them to act. They will tell you what you want to hear. You don't necessarily say, hey, I want you to act this way, or I want you to, you don't say that, but they pay attention. You know, mine acted like he forgot things the moment you told him. If he did, it was because he wasn't paying attention. Because whatever you were saying at that point didn't mean anything to him. Either you didn't mean anything to him, or what you had to say didn't mean anything to him. But if he wanted to pay attention, oh boy, he could remember literally word for word what you said, almost like a tape recorder, and repeat back what you said 10 years later, because it serves its purpose. Have you ever wondered how you could fall for him? When you look at the narcissist, you look back after the relationship is over, or you're trying to leave the relationship, and you're like, how could I have fallen for that? First of all, don't beat yourself up, because hindsight's always 20/20. Secondly, they're great schmoozers. Though my ex, you would have never known he was a schmoozer, because part of why I fell in love with him was he acted like what you see is what you get. Tell it like it is. You never have to ask where he stands on something, because he'll tell you whether you want to hear it or not. And I admired that, because I'd much rather deal with that than someone who's fake. But he was fake. Because all the while, he's schmoozing me, telling me what I want to hear, acting the way he knows I want. It's all a means to an end. Because people aren't people in narcissists' eyes. They are supplies. They're supplying a want or a need. They need companionship. You happen to be there to supply it. They want a roof over their head and not have to work as hard for it. You're there to supply it. Because the last 3 years of our marriage, he did not work. Claimed he couldn't because of his heart attack. Because he did legitimately have a heart attack. When he could have worked. He's working now. Because he has to. He doesn't have a choice if he wants to support himself. Because I'm not supporting him. And yet, he still has this idea that we're going to get together one day. It's not because he loves me and like he would have you believe. I'm sure where he's staying, he has them all believing that he's not giving up on his wife. He loves her tremendously. It's because I can supply a need. I'm capable of making enough money to support us on my one income and live relatively comfortably. Because I'm capable of that, he won't have to work or work as hard. Maybe they'll get a little part-time thing so he could say he's working something and he can live the easy life and not have to work for what he has. That's the only reason. And it's an ego thing. Because he had control of me for so bloody long that now that he doesn't have control, it's an ego thing. He's got to get control back. Because narcissists have control issues to the point that they convince themselves they're in control when they're not. My ex knew all the right things to say right from the beginning. Like I said, part of why I fell in love with him because he appeared to be genuine and straightforward. What you see is what you get. And I admire that in people. Like I said, I'd much rather deal with a person that's straightforward and maybe work on their tactfulness than to deal with a person who's fake. There's nothing that irritates me more than someone who's fake. And usually, I can pull out the fake ones pretty quick. But narcissists are hard to because they're always thinking ahead. They're always manipulating. They pay attention to every little thing and figure out a way to use it to their advantage. From the beginning, he knew that I was a romantic person, that I loved romance. So it was almost like he stepped out of a romance novel. I mean, he said all the right things, did all the right things. In the beginning, when we were first married, even. You know, they say after the marriage it changes. Well, not at first with us. He was so sweet and everything. I look back and there was subtle hints, but not a whole lot. Probably because I was still a supply to him. And because he was getting all the attention, because we didn't have kids when we were first married, obviously. And he would do things like every Friday, he'd get paid, he'd go to the store to cash the check, because back then they didn't have direct deposit like they do now, and come home with a rose. Just one rose. It was my I love you rose. And then we moved back down to New Orleans from Chicago, and that kind of went on the wayside because I was pregnant and we were living with his mother and things. But every once in a while, he would buy a rose as a reminder of what we used to be, and as a reminder of what he supposedly wanted, and reminder of his love for me. Narcissists only, they're not capable of loving anyone but themselves. I'm finding that out now. I kind of knew it then, but I didn't realize it was as widespread as it is. And he would do this even in front of others. He would do it in front of our kids, to like appear to the kids, oh, I love mom, I'm there for mom, you know. And he would do it in front of others. He did that in front of a bunch of people from a church we were going to. We used to belong to a cult. It was literally a cult. And in belonging to that, they had a convention each year, like a seminar. They had every year on Labor Day weekend in Dallas that we would attend. One particular year, a bunch of us had rented a van and we were driving up, and we had stopped off to get gas. He comes out with a rose. It happened to be a Friday. And of course I started crying because I'm thinking he's being all romantic and sweet and loving. It was to look good in front of the single women that we had in our van. Now, I don't think he had the hots for them. Oh, he had the hots for many women throughout our marriage, but I don't think he had the hots for them. It was just to make himself look good. So he gives me this rose, and of course I'm crying, like, oh my gosh, so romantic, so sweet, yada yada. And then women ask me, oh, so what is that about? So I explained to them the Friday Rose thing, and they're like, oh, they're just swooning. Because, of course, that's what most every woman wants, something like that. And they're like, oh my gosh, he could teach the single brothers something. He needs to have a class on teaching the single brothers how to be a husband. They're feeding right into it. Because, of course, they're telling me this. He's getting, filling a van up with gas. But, of course, they're telling me this. So, later on that night, when we get to the hotel, I'm telling him that as a way of, thanking him. I thanked him for the rose and said, you really impressed those sisters, those single women there, because they were like, you should teach a class, and, you should, because single brothers need to know this. Because I thought it was legitimate. But it wasn't. It was a means to an end. And it wasn't even about me. It had nothing to do with trying to show his love for me, because he didn't have love for me. Again, I was a means to an end. It was all about him, to make himself look good, like exalt himself above others, and to bring the attention on himself. Because another thing narcissists like to do is they will accuse you of the very thing that they're doing. He used to accuse me of loving attention, which I'm not going to lie, I kind of like attention. I don't mind being in the spotlight to an extent. But the way he would accuse me, it was like I wanted all the attention to myself, when actuality, he wanted all the attention to himself. It was kind of a backhanded confession, and narcissists do that. But narcissists are schmoozers. They will tell you whatever you want to hear, do whatever you want to do. I mean, do whatever you want done, just to get you. If you supply, if you're capable of supplying a need, whatever that need may be, or want, supply a want that they have. Because I look back, and throughout the years, as I'm looking back, all the times that we were at our worst, and I was actually considering maybe leaving him, he would do things like do something very romantic in order to hook me up again. And that's what narcissists do. Then, once they get you and you no longer supply a need, they'll move on to the next supply. Thing is, he kept me around for so long because I fulfilled all these supplies. He didn't want me any more intimately, but I still supplied a roof over his head, because even when he was working, I was the one making more money. And so he didn't have to work as hard. He just had to work enough to bring a little bit more money in to have a roof over our head. Thing is, though, he was never responsible with the money. That was my job. I had to squeeze every ounce I could out of every penny, because if he wanted a drink, he drank. Before he started on his drinking binges, if he wanted to do something that took money, he would buy it regardless. I remember one place, we were still living in New Orleans. We lost a place. We got evicted because of him. He was bringing the money in, he was working. I'm trying to put money aside because we didn't have a bank account. I'm trying to put money aside for rent because we're already behind on rent. I had to do all kinds of negotiation, finagling with the landlord, getting community help from a local church to catch up on rent. So I'm trying to put money aside to save for future rent, so we won't have this issue, so we could stay caught up. He was heavily into Kiss at that point, and he wanted to make a Kiss stage. I now realize that it wasn't just a stage, it was an altar. He worshipped the band Kiss. And in fact, in later years, the kids and I, when we refer to that, we call it the Kiss altar. It was beautiful. To his credit, he was very talented. But anyway, he wanted to build a Kiss altar. And he took an old kitchen cabinet that somebody was throwing away, and he had the idea he was going to spray paint it and make a sign, a Kiss logo sign, out of using Christmas lights and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but right now let's save the money for rent, because we don't want to get behind. I went somewhere one day, I don't remember where. I went with family somewhere or something. I come back home. He's building that Kiss altar. I see him making the sign out of wood that we did not have before. And it was clearly not scrap wood that he could have picked up at a trash pile or whatever. It was clearly new wood that you get from a hardware store or whatever. Turns out he went to the local hardware store and bought that piece of wood, and it was good plywood too. It wasn't even, balsa board or anything. It was good plywood. And the Christmas lights and everything. And I knew I couldn't say anything about it because I knew, for one thing, it would do no good. It was already done. He had already started drilling holes in the wood, so it's not like we could have returned it. And it wouldn't have done any good anyway, even if we could have returned it, because he wouldn't have. And I looked at it, and he knew what I must have been thinking. And he's like, before you, don't say anything about it. I had to get this because for my mental health, I needed to do something. Well, we were short on rent again. Landlord got tired of dealing with us, so we lost the place. And we had to move out into his sister's place, who his sister was married to a major abuser himself. He was a narcissist also. So you can imagine the stress that was with two narcissists under one roof. One being in major control because it was his roof. All because he wanted to do what he wanted to do. Didn't care about his own children, that they would be homeless. And the thing of it is, I found myself defending him. Because the abuse was, the manipulation was so in depth that he had me believing he was right. Not for that particular incident. I was always aggravated at him for that. But in other areas, I would defend him. They talk about how can a woman defend her abuser when, here the abuser is hitting her and somebody goes and cracks him over the head and she ends up cracking that person over the head for hitting her abuser. I never could understand that. Now I'm starting to. Now I never went that far, but I don't know that I wouldn't have when I was knee deep in that situation. Because they can manipulate you. They know how to manipulate you. It's all by design. They know, like I said, they know what to do. They know what to say in order to get you hooked. And then they'll throw you a little bone every once in a while just to keep you on the hook. Because they may need you for the future. You haven't been they're not finished with you because you could supply a future need. And he would do things like that all the time. Like I talked about earlier, the Friday Rose. One particular time at a church that we were attending that no longer exists now, in front of the congregation of roughly 100, 150 people, the way he acted, husband of the year. He gets up in front of the church, pastor had let him, he evidently talked to the pastor beforehand, started touting how husbands love your wives, and I haven't loved my wife like I should. And then he quotes Proverbs 31 verse 10, um, and how I'm a jewel, I'm the best wife ever, and he hasn't loved me like he should. And of course, tears are streaming down my face because it's like, oh my gosh, what person wouldn't want their spouse to do something like that? Not necessarily like that, but just to acknowledge how much they love. Public display of how much their spouse loves them. So, of course, I'm like, oh my gosh. But it wasn't about showing his love for me because he didn't love. Narcissists are not capable of loving anyone but themselves. It was about making himself look good and bringing attention to himself. Because at that point, for one thing, I was teaching Sunday school. Well, I was a teacher's assistant for Sunday school for the kids. So in his mind, I was getting attention. Where? I don't know. But in his feeble mind, I was. And in his feeble mind, I looked higher than him. So this was a way of him looking higher than me and getting attention. Oh, look at him. I wish that he would do what, all these women, I'm sure, were like, oh my goodness. I felt sorry for their poor husbands because I'm sure a lot of women are like, why don't you don't do that? Why don't you do that? Something like that. And it was never about trying to show love. It was trying to make me think he loved me, all while trying to get himself attention. And it also could have been a time when it was a tough time, and did that to make sure I didn't want to leave him. Because I think that was after 07, and after he came back and stuff, I let him back and stuff, and so it was a way of ensuring that he was able to stay. Anything he did was never to be nice or sweet or caring. It was about a means to end. Y'all, for the longest time, I mean a good year or two, I would wake up every morning to coffee in bed. I mean, literally, I would open my eyes to hear him, honey, sit up, I got coffee for you. And I would sit up and there's coffee right there in bed, waiting for me to sit up and drink coffee in bed. I realize now what it was, because he would do things like that every morning. I mean, almost literally without fail, for well over a year, if not 2 years, maybe more. Where I'd wake up in the morning with coffee in bed, sometimes even breakfast in bed if he felt particularly energetic. And yet for the whole day we would be fighting, arguing about something or another. And then I would think, well, I'm not going to get coffee in the morning. I mean, I remember literally thinking that. And waking up to coffee in bed and thinking, oh, even with all of that, he still gives me coffee. And it was by design. Because I supplied a need. And that's what narcissists do. We could be in practically a knockdown, drag-out argument the night before. I'd wake up to coffee in bed the next morning. Or I'd wake up to breakfast in bed. And I would immediately think, and he knew this, I would immediately think that's his way of apologizing. because I never really got an apology out of him, ever. The most I would get is, yeah, I did that, but it's because you did this. Or because it was a reaction to this. I did this, but. Which is another thing he always accused me of. Going on the defense. Yeah, I would get very defensive because he would put me in that position to be defensive. And that's exactly what he wanted. They do that. They get a sense of satisfaction when they're able to put you on the defensive. And that's why another reason why narcissism is so hideous is because they can be abusing you and others don't even see it. And they could be abusing you right in front of others. A thing that I just learned called dog whistling. Or dog whistle. When you have a dog whistle, you blow the whistle, you don't hear it. Your human ears don't hear it because of the high pitch, human ears don't hear it, but a dog will. Dog will come running just like that. That's what they do. It'll be subtle things. For example, you could be at home the whole day, body shaming you, telling you you're horrible looking, your body's awful, you're fat. I mean, that's what he used with me all of the time, because he knew that was something I was very self-conscious about. Then you go to a party and there's cupcakes and sweets and everything, typical party. And there's also a nice little vegetable tray. Oh, vegetables, raw vegetables, awesome. I could really use, and see the vegetables. I'm sorry, I'm mixing it up here. And you, the victim, say, oh, cupcakes, yum. And you go to grab one, oh, and the abuser sees that tray of vegetables, raw vegetables, and is like, oh, yum, raw vegetables. I'm going to eat some of those because, I'm really kind of watching my figure here. Anybody else would not even catch on to the slightest thing. Just appears to be an innocuous conversation. When actually, it's a subtle jab to reopen that wound that was open earlier about body shaming. This is just an example. I mean, it could be about anything. It's like an inside joke, except it's not a joke. It's adding more trauma. It's their way of showing control and showing you don't have me. You're not pleasing me. Or just a way of keeping control. Because with narcissists, they're all about control. That's why they start manipulating in the first place. Controlling others. And they especially like the strong ones, because when they can manipulate a strong one into being under their control, that's a badge of honor. Because they like the strong ones, they just don't like the strong ones being strong around them. Because he knew I was strong. He would compliment me how strong I was. But then in the same breath, he knocked me down. You don't do this. You're fat. Why can't you look like that? And narcissists are known to cheat. I'm finding now that it's commonplace for a narcissist to cheat. And as I said last week, I realize now my ex did cheat on me. And he pretty much cheated right in front of my face. And it's like, he even confessed it. And I didn't realize it was confession at the time. I'm realizing it now because of all the stuff I'm looking up on narcissism. And in seeing that he was interested in other women that did not look like me. I mean, I'm not runway material. I know that. And I look nothing like his dream woman, which he had no problems telling me about his dream woman. His dream woman was like 5'10", long black hair, athletic build. I mean, he would tell me this in the guise of, if a woman like that walks by, to make sure he knows so he could turn his head. Because I was supposed to help him not look upon other women in lust. I was supposed to help him. That's why he always wanted to know what turned me on with men, because so he could use that against me. But the thing is, I don't have one set thing, so it's like, what turns you on? I told you, why don't you tell me? I don't know. It's not a look. It was, if a man is well dressed, that catches my attention. Yeah, I know, big muscles too. No, not really. Maybe solid, like a athletic build. Maybe some muscle. But all those big muscles, that was a turnoff for me. And little by little, he was trying to figure out what my vulnerabilities were, to see what I lusted over, to one, ease his conscience. Because yeah, they do have somewhat of a conscience, they just don't listen to it. Or not really a conscience, it was more to make himself feel better about himself, because he knew my vulnerability, and he was more in control, because he told me what he liked, so I was supposed to tell him what I would struggle over, so he could point it out. Oh, watch people watching, because he accused me of cheating all the time, or looking at a man in lust, and chances are I couldn't even tell you what that man looked like, because I was probably too busy looking at a house over down the street with a purple roof. You know, but that's how they get you. They manipulate you, and they do just enough to make you think that there's something still there. Like I said, with the coffee, every single morning, almost literally without fail. Unless we woke up late or something like that, I would get coffee in the morning. Because he was an early riser. I'm not a morning person. He would wake up early in the morning, fix a pot of coffee, have it ready for me, and bring it to me in bed. It was a way of keeping me, because I was his supply. I was supplying a need, whatever that need was. And so don't feel stupid for falling for a narcissist, because they're master manipulators. They remember things, they remember what you tell them, and they store it for later. They may not be able to use it right then and there, but they remember it for later, and they use it at a later date. And that's what mine did. There was nothing sacred with him. He would use anything against me, including, and here's what's the most despicable. I've talked about how I was raped and I was molested and all of that when I was younger. One particular time at church, the church I go to now, we were talking about overcoming obstacles. And the passage of scripture that we read just had something to do with the rape. And I talked about how I overcame rape. Everybody was giving me attention that day because, like, oh, thank you for being brave enough to talk about it and stuff. And to be honest, I didn't think about it. It just kind of fit what we were talking about, so I talked about it. Well, I was getting attention. People coming up to me saying thank you for being open and on and on. And then next thing I know, he tells me that he was molested by someone. I won't say who, but because it's not worth talking about. I'm just mentioning it for context. And I'm like, and he said, don't tell anybody though. I said, oh, I won't, I promise. Next thing I know, he's telling our kids. Next thing I know, he's telling our pastor. And this was towards the end of our marriage. And that's when it dawned on me. The life piece of crap wanted attention. Because in his mind, I was getting more attention than him from others. So he used my past trauma, flipped it onto himself. Like if he experienced this same trauma, all to get attention. Now, was he molested by the person that he claimed he was? I don't know. Knowing the individual like I do, it wouldn't surprise me to one day see proof that it did happen. But as of now, I'm not thinking that he was. I'm thinking that he said that knowing that it's believable, knowing this person, and knowing that it would give him attention. Use something that was believable, plausible, just to get attention, to take the attention away from me. That I wasn't even seeking. I just mentioned it because it had relevance to the subject we were talking about. And that's how despicable he is. That's how despicable narcissists in general are. They're very manipulative. So don't feel bad when you realize how much you have been manipulated, because you're not alone. I approve of it. I just connected yesterday with a gal that she said we were swapping stories, and our stories are very, very similar with what we endured. And I've connected with other abuse survivors, and they've all gone through similar. And there are some that are even more manipulative than the average. I'm convinced mine was his superpower was being uber manipulative. And it's not a good superpower. But from my experience, it seems like he's over the top, but I'm sure he's not. And they'll tell you anything they want to hear, that you want to hear. And they know what you want to hear. And then once you leave, that's when they change. Oh, I'll change, I promise. Just give me another chance. No, they don't. They change for a little while. Let's say you take them back. They'll change for a month or two. Then when they realize that they've got you hooked again, they actually get worse. Because with mine, what he would do is, back in '07, when I believed his lies and took him back, and it took several months, once he realized that he was secure where he was and that he wasn't going to go anywhere, that I wasn't going to kick him out or anything like that, the abuse got worse. The manipulation got worse. It was a form of punishment because I dared put him in jail. Because for years he tried to get me to hit him because he said I was the one supposed to be in jail, not him. Because I'm the one who hit him first. I think I did. I mean, he has my memory so skewed that I'm not 100% sure. I think I did hit him first. If I remember correctly, it was because he called me a whore. And he knew that was something that I'm super sensitive about because of my father. And my biological father. And a knee-jerk reaction, I slapped him in his face. But, to hear him tell it, I beat him several times before he hit me once. And it took him hitting me 3 times, hitting back 3 times for me to stop. He's not wrong. But it wasn't because he hit back. It was because I felt it was getting so crazy that me hitting him back and fighting back was only making things worse. And I mistakenly thought that if I stopped and started trying to handle things rationally, that this never-ending cycle would stop. When it did. It just snowballed in other areas. So don't fall for the thing that, I've changed, just give me another chance. You could give them 1,000 chances and they would still revert back to what they were. In fact, they'll get worse. Because let's say, for instance, I were to momentary lapse of reasoning, momentary lapse of sanity, and take him back, I'd give it 6 months where he'd be on straight and narrow, be perfect husband of the year material and everything. And then once he realized he had me, he would be 10 times worse. Because this time around, he actually had probation and other issues that snowballed on top of the domestic issue, which it's still going on, so I can't talk about it. But so I would literally be put through hell if I took him back, which I never will. So don't take the narcissist back just because they say, I'll change, and they actually appear like they've changed. They may even say the right things, like, I was a horrible husband. I failed you. Please forgive me. At that point, you say, yeah, you did fail me. And, yeah, I forgave you a long time ago. But I ain't going to trust you again. Because trust has been obliterated. It's all part of the manipulation. And you can never trust them. Because though a narcissist can become self-aware and change, I actually follow 2 guys that are self-aware narcissists and going through therapy and stuff to change. That is definitely the rarity. Because narcissists generally don't see their need for change. They see others' needs for change, but not their own. So you guys have a good week. Stay blessed. And hey, I love feedback. If y'all have any feedback to these videos, please put them in the comments. And always please like and share these videos, because knowledge is power. Narcissists will isolate their victims, and so the victims think they're the only ones going through this. So if enough of these videos get shared, there'll be victims out there that realize that they're not alone. Stay safe.